Hi friends, my name is Akib and welcome to my channel Developers Point. In this video, we'll be discussing .NET 5 Web API crash course. In a short period of time, you'll get to know the latest version of .NET 5 and build a web API with .NET 5 and Visual Studios. We will start by creating a new web application and we'll be making our first web API call within the very first few minutes. Additionally, we'll create a new Git repository for our local source control. You could also push that repository to GitHub, for instance. Then we'll dive deep into the web API. You'll learn about the model view controller pattern and create your first model and control by yourself. We will talk about the HTTP request methods, proper return types, and status codes. And then we'll be implementing all card operations such as create, read, update, and delete in the subsequent section. So let's get started. Before we can start deploying our web application, we have to install the .NET 5 SDK, Visual Studios, and Postman. I'll share the link in my description of all the softwares we are using, or you could just do it by googling. Let's start with .NET 5 SDK. As you can see my screen, here I have been installing .NET 5 version 5.0.3. Depending on the time when you are watching this course, there might be a different version of SDK available. As you can see now, here there is a different version like .NET 6 preview, which has been released latestly. Like it's the latest .NET which is available on the internet. But I would like to go with .NET version 5.0.3. As you can see, few new versions are also available, but I'm not going to work with that. Anyways, choose the proper version for your operating system and install it. Like I'll be working with Windows, so I'll be going to a Windows section here and I'll be installing x64-bit because I'm working with x64-bit of my OS, so I'll be clicking on that. And the download has begun. Now the software which is required next is Visual Studios. So we'll be going to a Visual Studios tab. Here you can see like we have three different Visual Studios. Visual Studios and Visual Studios for Windows, Visual Studio Code for Windows and Mac, and welcoming to a Visual Studios for Mac. As I said in previously, I was working on Windows, so I'll be downloading Visual Studios 2019 with Windows. So here as you can see a drop down saying like it has three versions: community, professional, and enterprise. And these all are for 2019, which is the latest studios, and I'll be downloading the community version 2019, so I'll be clicking on that. Here there is a small note: if you're downloading the preview version of .NET, as you can see here, wait, just let me show you. As you can see here, there is a preview version of .NET 6 preview. Like if you're downloading this, then you must be downloading the Visual Studios of preview version. Otherwise the .NET is not going to work on your system. If you're watching my video in future, like when the preview version is officially released, then any Visual Studios that is latest, that works fine with that. So last but not least, what we need one more thing is like we are going to download Postman, and the Postman is used to make API calls and it's very helpful. So what we can do is we can just click on the download the app button and the download gets started. So you can just install it. We will be using Postman to test our web API calls. That's it. Sounds simple, and it is. Now we can start to build our first web application with .NET 5. Okay, after installation of Visual Studios, we'll be opening Visual Studios 2019 and we can see a screen like this. In this screen, we can continue without any code or without any project, or we can just create a new project by clicking here. Here we can see some templates which are helping us to create a new project. So to make our life easier, what I'll be doing is I'll be just filtering the language here, and I'll be selecting C# and I'll be searching for web applications. So here it is. Like here we get ASP.NET Core and .NET Framework. But to make our life easier, what I'll be selecting is ASP.NET Core because .NET Core already has the .NET Framework which is used in the earlier days. So I'll be choosing to go with ASP.NET Core web application and I'll be selecting that and I'll be hitting on next. Here we can configure our new project so that we can give a project name. So I'll be calling it as web API project, and here we get a solution name and the location where you want to save your project. So what we'll be doing next is like we'll be creating the option. You guys may be wondering why the creating option is enabled without selecting any SDKs. The SDK will be selected in the next step. I'll show you. But so for now we'll be clicking on create button here, and then here we can see one more configuration window where we can select our SDKs. So like here we have two options, then .NET Framework and .NET Core. I will be going with .NET Core. And for SDKs, in my machine I have installed .NET Core 2.1, .NET Core 3.1 and .NET Core 5.0. So I will be going with .NET Core 5.4 as this course is based on .NET Core 5.4, and here we can see few templates like ASP.NET Core empty template. Empty template is nothing but it will be not providing us any sample solution or like sample files, so that we can have a reference of that. ASP.NET Core Web API, it creates the solution with a Web API controller, and it will be having some configuration files, and it will be having a sample example which we'll be seeing in the next minute. So what I'll be doing is I'll be selecting ASP.NET Core Web API as our course is based on, and I'll be selecting authentication as not required, so I'll be checking no authentication. And to make our life easier, what I'll be doing is like I'll be unchecking HTTPS option. And in the bottom here we can see that like we have a source called templates 5.0.3 which is the latest .NET version. So here we can cross check it, and I'll be hitting on create. So that's it guys, like here our API project has been created. So next what we'll be seeing is the files which are present in our solution. Now you can see here like the Web API project has been created. When the project is created, let's have a look at the Solution Explorer and the files that have been generated for us. If you are not familiar with Visual Studios 2019, please have a look around first and try to make yourself at home. Visual Studios is so big, but it's sufficient enough to just focus on the parts I am explaining. In this course, you will learn all the necessary features as we pass on. But for now, you can have a look at the Solution Explorer here, and you can find all the files here in the right side corner. So firstly, we'll be checking with dependencies. In dependencies, we can see a lot of files here. We have analyzers, frameworks and packages. In frameworks and analyzers, we have the .NET libraries which have been pre-installed by Microsoft. So next what we'll be looking at is like we'll be looking at launch setting.json which is present in the properties folder, and this launch setting.json gives us some configuration methods to help the application to get launched. Here we can see few methods in the launch setting, and we can see here a IIS setting and IIS Express setting and a Web API project settings. Here in these settings we can see that whenever the project is run by clicking a button here called IIS Express, as you can see here, it runs on the localhost or a local server which is known as localhost 59754, called by a string called application URL which is present in the settings called IIS settings configuration method. But when we run this application through PowerShell, what we'll be getting that is like it will be running on a server which is called the application URL here also, but it runs on a server called localhost 5000. I'll just show you in the next minute. Now as I told you, it will be having two different servers. Firstly, we'll be checking that. Firstly, we'll be doing it by clicking on a button here called IIS Express, and we'll be clicking on that to launch our application. It takes a bit of time for the first launch. So as you can see that the building of our application has been started, and here you can see the URL as 59754. It has been hosted on a server called localhost is to localhost colon 59754. So this is what we doesn't matter the page what is appearing for now, but we'll be looking at the URL here. It has been hosted at a server 59754. Now we will be closing this window and we'll be going back to our Visual Studios, and the debugging stops. Now what we'll be doing is we'll be running this application using a PowerShell. So for that we'll be going to the views column, views tab here, and then here we'll be selecting a terminal. Instead doing that, we can just go for a shortcut called Ctrl', and the Windows Developer PowerShell will appear here. Now what we need to do is, like, we have not created the project and solution file in the same folder. So we will be going cd into our project folder, which is web API project, and we'll be hitting enter. So now we have gone into a path of our project. Now what we'll be doing is we'll be running a command called .NET run. Now this will build our application. As you can see, it's building here. Now here you can see that we have got the results of our application, and now here we can see like Microsoft.hosting.lifetime of 0, now listening on HTTP localhost 5000. So what we'll be doing is we'll be opening our Google Chrome and we'll be routing to that URL. So I'll be typing HTTP ://localhost :5000, and here it does not work in this way, but we just need to provide /controller name. So in our project we are having a controller called Swagger. Like, for now you just focus on the URL what I'm typing in, so the web page gets appear here in this way. But the server what we have used now is different from the server what we have used previously. So here you can see that it has been using localhost 5000. So now we'll be going back to our Visual Studios and we'll be checking like what are the other options it gives. So to stop the application which we have built, we can just press at Ctrl C to shut down the application. So I'll be clicking on Ctrl C. Now the application has been shut down. So in this way we can just make use of these settings which are present in launchsetting.json file. And in our Solution Explorer we can see one more settings file here saying appsetting.json file. It is a file having the same configurations. Here we have the log level which gives us the log level. The default is information, Microsoft is equal to warning, and Microsoft.hosting.lifetime is information. Here the information means like while debugging we have got some information saying that like now your application is listening on localhost.5000. So the information which is given like that while debugging, so it has been set to information, but the Microsoft level is called warning level, so it does not give any information to you. But when we run a command called watch run, we will be not getting any information regarding that. So if you want that information to, we can change this to from warning to information. So for now I will be going with the default settings what we have got with our application. So I will be changing it to just warning. And another important thing where we use this appsetting.json is like we can use our connection strings and the configuration settings which have been written in this file appsetting.json can be accessed by the code. Like for example in entity framework or for like database servers we will be using a connection string. So the connection string will be derived from this file. And now we'll just go back to our Solution Explorer and we'll go at the bottom. Here we can see the weather forecast CS file which is the model class of our weather forecast. So like we'll be having here date, temperature and something like which we'll be discussing later. But for now we'll be going to our startup class where we can find our project configurations and configuration services. So in this startup class we have two methods, configure services and configure method. In configure services method what we'll be doing is we'll be adding all our services and dependency injections. But while coming to a configure method is used to pipeline the application, means like how the application responds to the HTTP request made by the web browser. Here we can see that we have used routing, authentication, authorization and user endpoints to map the controller. These are all the middlewares we are using here. As I said for middleware, like middleware is nothing but use routing is a middleware here which routes our application from one controller to other controller, and authorization which authorizes the user, and the endpoint like here mapping the controllers is also a middleware. Here you can see that we have a app.useDevelopers exception page. When the application gets crashed in the browser, the exception is catched here. And now we will be going back to our Solution Explorer and we will be checking with program.cs file. This program.cs file is having a main method which is the entry point to our application. Here we can see that it has some host builders, like this method is used to go to our startup class. Here we can see that like the startup class has been called by using useStartup method. And now we will be moving to our Solution Explorer and now we will be moving to our controllers. In controllers folder we can see a weather forecast controller. So we will be opening that. This is the demo controller which we get with our application. So we'll be getting to know this controller in the next minute, but what we'll be getting to know for now is like we will be able to use the HTTP get method in this controller. Now here we can see that here we have a get method. What do we expect when we run this get method? It should return us some random weather data when we run this get method. So we can do this by just clicking on the button here IIS Express, or we can do it by developer PowerShell. So like firstly we'll be going to our app launch settings.json file. Here we can see that like in the IIS Express settings, like here the launch URL is Swagger. As you have seen that previously I have provided /swagger, but here what we want is not Swagger. We will be changing it to weather forecast so that it get redirected to our controller called weather forecast, which is present in our controllers folder, which is having a get method. So what I'll be doing is I'll be just replacing this Swagger to weather forecast, and I will be removing the controller. So we just need to provide the controller name here, and I will be doing the same with the PowerShell too. So I will be just copying that weather forecast and I'll be replacing the Swagger with weather forecast here, and I'll be just saving the settings. Now to just make you clear, we'll just go back to our controller class here in the solution explorer and we'll open that. So in the top bottom here we can see that like here we are having a class name called weather forecast controller. So like controller is a suffix like which will be having it to every controller name or we'll be creating here in the controller folder. Here you can see the controller as a suffix to every class here. The controller, whatever the controller we are creating, we will be having this controller and the name of the controller. So the name of the controller is weather forecast, and here on the above we can see that we have a root and containing of a string. So the string controller in the brackets, it tells us the convention that here the name of the controller should be passed, and it will be accessed by its name called weather forecast. Now what we will be doing is we will be just running the application. So I will be clicking on IIS Express. Now you can see that the build has been started and this takes to our browser. Now here we can see that it has been using a local host 59754/weather forecast. So weather forecast is the controller name and it will be redirected to our controller get method. So here we can see that some random data has been returned to our browser or the UI, which returns like random data of weather for the next few days. And to see the data be a bit more organized, what we'll be doing is we'll be opening the developer tools in the settings of our Chrome and we'll be going to more tools. Here we can see that we have an option called developer tools option and we'll be clicking on that. Here we also have a shortcut to open these developer tools. For that we just need to click Ctrl+Shift+I. So that we will be opening these developer tools. Now what we'll be doing is like we will be going to our network tab here on the top and we'll be clicking on that. What we'll be doing next is we'll be just reloading the page. After reloading the page, we'll be getting two files here. So like the file called weather forecast, we'll be clicking on that. So it gives us a preview of the data in a bit more organized method. As we can see the data here, now let's go to a Postman and see this weather data in our Postman by using the URL. Now what we'll be doing is we'll be just copying the URL here which is present in our Chrome browser and we'll be going to our Postman. In the Postman we can see that here we have a request to enter the URL. Here we have a column which requires the URL, so we'll be pasting our URL here. So it's a get method, we'll be selecting the method here. So we'll be selecting the method here. In our case it's a get method, so we'll be selecting get and we'll be sending the request. So it gives us the same data here which has been given in our Chrome browser or the developer tools in a bit organized way. As I have shown you previously, we have another way to run this application. In that way, we will be changing this URL to like we will be changing the server from 59754 to 5000. So to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be just going back to our Visual Studios and here we'll stop debugging. And then we will be opening our developer PowerShell. In the developer PowerShell, firstly what we will be doing is we will be setting the path to web API project and we will be hitting enter. now the path has been set. So what we'll be doing to do that is like we'll be typing a command called .NET run or .NET watch run. So I'll be going with .NET run and I'll be hitting on enter. As you can see that it has been built successfully and the project is now listening on HTTP localhost 5000. So what we'll be just doing is we'll be going back to our Postman and we'll be just replacing this 59754 server to 5000. So just replace it with 5000 and hit on the send button. You will be looking the same data here, but the servers are different. As you can see, the server is 5000 now, previously it was 52754. Alright, everything seems to be in place now. Let's initialize the Git repository now and then be ready to build our own new controller. Now to initialize the Git repository, what we'll be doing is we'll be going back to our Visual Studios 2019 and here we'll be stopping our application by pressing Ctrl C. Now we can see that the application has been stopped and we'll be closing this window here. And to initialize the Git repository, what we'll be doing is like we'll be going to the right bottom of our Visual Studios. Here we can see that we have an option called add Git repository. Add this solution to your preferred source control system. We can also press a shortcut named as Alt Control F9, but we'll be clicking on this here. It's very much easier. So we will be getting an option called Get here. We will be clicking on that. So it's open a window called Create a Git repository. Here we realize a Git local repository and it will be having a local path of our application. And now here we can see that I have already signed into my account. So if you are using for the first time, then you have to sign in here to create a private repository in the GitHub. Like the repository name will be the name of the project which we are pushing into a Git, and here we can write some description. Here I will be writing as code for the web API project, and here there is a private, so I will be unchecking that because if I keep it as private then no one will be to access this application in GitHub except me. So I will be clicking on create and push here, but we will be not doing this now. We will be going to check out the other options available here. So we will be going to other options. We can see that we have an option called existing remote. Then if you are already having a server or the URL on the GitHub, you can just paste it here and push it, or else you can create a Git locally on your own machine. But I'd like to go with online, so I will be clicking on GitHub and I will be creating a new repository and I will be unchecking this private method. So I will be just clicking on create and push. So now we can see that that has been initialized, and we can see that here we have two changes to push. Now what we'll be doing is like we'll be going to this git changes here, and here we can see that there is nothing to push. It's already has been pushed. So we'll be going to our Google Chrome and we'll be opening our GitHub project. So now the GitHub has been opened, so I'll be opening the file which or the application which we have just recently pushed in. Here we can see that everything has been pushed in. Now we will be going back to our Visual Studios, and what we will be taking a look at is like if we make any changes, then these changes are going to appear here and we will be stashing them and then we will be pushing them into a Git repository. So that's it for the Git, and here as we pass on we will be making some changes on, we will be pushing them in the Git repository. And as you can see here, a window has been opened after clicking on the push button. Here we can see that here we had an empty repository which has been created newly, and we have pushed a project files. So that's it for now. What we'll be doing in the next minute is like we'll be creating our own model view controller, and we'll be creating our first model controller, and we'll be checking with the HTTP methods to test our get, post, put and other methods available in the Postman. So far you have learned how to create a web API project and .NET 5 from scratch, and how to make your first API call with Postman. As we go forward, we will create a new controller and a model for our contacts. With that, you will learn how to implement all correct operations with a web API. This means you will create, read, update and delete data. But first, let's have a look at the model view controller, or short MVC patterns, which is the foundation of all this. Alright, so like as I told you, like firstly we'll be going with a MVC pattern which is the base of our application. So like firstly we'll be going with model class, and so to do that what we'll be doing is like we'll be going to our web API project in Solution Explorer, and here we'll be creating a new folder because it's always a good practice to maintain all the different files in the different folders. So here we'll be naming this folder as models and we'll be hitting enter. As you can see that the folder with a name called models has been created, and we'll be right clicking on that to add a class in this folder. So like we'll be adding a class named as contacts and we'll be hitting on that. So now you can see that there is a class called contacts which has been created inside a folder called models, and the model folder is been inside our project called web API project. So as you can see here, the class has been with no properties initialized in that. Now the next step what we'll be doing is like we will be initializing our properties in this class, and so to do that what we'll be doing is like we'll be just typing prop and we'll be tapping on that. So like we'll be getting our properties here. It's a data type of the property, and my property defines the string of the or the name of the of that property. So like firstly I will be naming it as id. So id is an integer thing, so like int will be remaining as it is, but I will be changing my property name to id. And next what we'll be doing is like we will be having a string property first name, and I will be replacing my property with first name. And the next property what we'll be having is like we'll be having a last name for that. So I'll be again using that prop thing, and I'll be initializing a string here, and I will be changing this my property to last name. And then again some people will be having some nicknames. Suppose for example we take Tony Stark, sometimes he is also called as Iron Man. So I will be changing this my property to nickname, and then we'll add a place to this class. So like it's also a string property, and then I will be replacing my property to place. And for a change like we'll also be having a datetime property. So like I'll be adding a datetime property to this, and here I'll be changing this into datetime, and we'll be having this name as come on, let's take it as date created. So by default I want this value to be datetime dot. What I'll be doing is like I'll be just writing equal to, and it will be equal to write datetime dot now. And for next what we'll be adding is like a boolean value, which is the only thing remaining here. So like I will be just adding a bool data type. I'll be taking it as like is deleted. So like, and I want this boolean value to be false by default. For that I'll be doing the same which I did with the date created. So I'll be just typing equal to, and then here I'll be giving it as false. So by setting the bool value is equal to false, it becomes quite handy if you want to do a soft delete. So deleting an entry just by setting a flag and not really deleting it from the database. Alright, that's our model and it's created now. Now you guys can feel free to commit all your changes to a Git repository. What we can do, as you can see the changes here is 2. So we'll be clicking on that pencil mark like, or we can go for a shortcut called Control Alt F7. So I'll be clicking it here because it's very handy, and we can see the changes what we have done here. So like we have created a contact as class which is in a models folder. So I'll be clicking on that and I'll be staging it. So as we have not saved our changes, so get saved our changes. I'll be clicking on save, then the changes get staged. So now what we'll be doing is like here I'll be giving a proper message like what the changes has been done. So the changes what we have done is like the first model has been created. So I'll be typing first model created, and okay, let's make it a bit tidy. So I'll be using the caps here, and I'll be changing the C also. And then what we'll be doing is like we'll be hitting on commit staged. Now after committing the changes, what we'll be doing is like here you can see a message saying that the commit has been created locally. So to push that to our GitHub, what we'll be doing is like here we have a push option. We'll be clicking on that. So here we can see that the push has been initialized and it has been getting done the compression of objects, and here we get a message of after a successful push. It says like successfully pushed to origin or master. Alright, as we have successfully pushed our changes, now what we'll be looking the next meet is like we'll be creating our first controller. As I said you now we'll be creating a controller, and creating a controller is quite bit different. Some guys may be asking why it is quite different. We'll see it now. To create a controller, what we'll be doing is like we'll be going to our solution explorer here and we'll be seeing a folder called controllers. Here already we have one controller named as weather forecast controller, but we want to add a customized controller for the class which we have created as contacts. For that we'll be right clicking on the controllers folder and we'll be going with add. Here you can see a new item, but instead of going with a new item we can just go to a controller here and we can click on that. Now here we have a bunch of options, but here these all are MVC controllers, but what we want is an API controller. For that we'll be going to an option called API, which is present on the left hand side of your window. So we will be clicking on API here and then we can see a bunch of options for API controller. API controller with empty template, and API controller with read and write actions, API controller with actions using entity framework. Here these three options are provided by this Microsoft Visual Studio 2019. So what we'll be doing now for now is like we'll be going with API controller read and write actions. So it makes sense, like in real world projects that we never start completely to build a project from scratch. So like we'll be selecting the API controller with read and write actions so that it may have some code which we can build in. So that I'll be selecting that option and I'll be clicking on add here. And now we get a window like this. Here we can name our controller, which is defaultly named as values controller. We'll be replacing that name by saying contacts controller. So we'll be renaming it as contacts controller, and we'll be again clicking on add here. So we'll be adding it again. Now you can see that we have a controller which has been created with a name called contacts controller in the controller folder, and we have some pre-built code in that controller. As you can see that here it has some get methods and a post method, put method. In the sense we can see that like already the card operations has been created for us or generated for us by default. Actual logic is missing. Of course we'll cover that. But first let's talk about the contract controller in general, what it is derived from and what these attributes above the class name actually are. So we can see some attributes which are present above the class name here, and we will be discussing about that now. Now here we can see that our controller has been derived from a controller called controller base class, and this acts as a base class for our MVC application or our MVC controller. Here we can add the other classes too, but in our case controller base is much more sufficient. The next interesting thing in the API controller is the attributes called API controller attribute. This attribute indicates the type and also all the derived types which is used to serve the HTTP responses. Additionally, this attribute enables several API specific features like attribute routing and automatic HTTP 400 responses if something goes wrong with the model. We'll get into the details when we actually make use of these features. Regarding the attribute routing, that's the next thing we are going to look at. Here we can see the route attribute which is very next to the API controller attribute. That's how we are able to find the specific controller when we want to make a call. You may remember this attribute from the weather forecast controller. Here we can see that we are having a string named as API/controller. This means that we can access this controller by API/ and the controller name. In our case it's contacts. So again it's a part of the name of the controller which comes before the controller. Now if you see this controller route attribute, then here we can see that this is much different from the route attribute in the weather forecast controller. Here we have API/controller. While coming to the weather forecast controller, here we can see that the API attribute is missing or the API string is missing. It depends on controller to controller. Some controllers use it and some controllers may not use it. In the end it's up to you like what you want to prefer. Alright, then let's go to a contact controller and write some code here. The first thing what I want to do in this controller is like I want to add a dummy contact list that I can return to a client. So what we do is like here in this method we will be creating a private list of contacts and we'll be naming it as contacts and it will be a new list of contacts. So like we'll be adding few contacts to this, and what we get here is like we can see a underline below the contacts. It's because there is no reference added to it. To fix that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be just hovering our cursor over that, and here we can see a light bulb on the left hand side. So we will be just going to that and we'll be clicking on that. So we can see that here is a contact class using web API products.models. So we'll be clicking on that, and you can see here the error has been gone. And here we are gonna just replace the C in front of contacts. So now it's perfectly fine. There is no error here. But we can see underline here HTTP GET. I'll let you know in a moment why it is so like that. So for that, what I'll be doing is like I'll be creating a new contact, and I'll be adding the parameters to it, which we have in our contact class. So like what we have there is like ID, where ID is equal to 1. Then we have the first name. So like first name will be a string, so like we'll be keeping it in a quotes, and it's called developer. And then we have a last name. So like last name is also a string, so we'll be having it in double quotes, and last name will be a, like my channel last name, so it's like developer point, so I'll be keeping it as point. And the player where it is created is like, so next what we have is like nickname. We'll be adding a nickname as, my favorite is Tony Stark, so like I'll be naming it as Iron Man. And next we'll be adding a place. So place is like, place is also a string, so we'll be adding a string here, and we'll be calling it as any random place. I'll be calling it as India. So it has been done here now. Now we'll be adding one more contact to this. For that we'll be giving a comma here, and then we'll be hitting enter to go to our next line. I'll be just closing this solution explorer to make it a better view. Now here we'll be doing the same. Here we'll be adding in one more contact, then we'll be passing the parameters, and ID will be like 2, and then we'll be adding the first name. First name is like Angular. Here you can see that like we are getting an error. It's because like the first name, which is a type of string, so we should be entering a string. So we will be adding the double quotes, and we'll be writing Angular, and then we'll be passing the last name, and the last name is like, I'll be adding, I am a quite bit familiar to Angular 11, so I'll be writing 11 here. Then we'll be passing a nickname to it, and I'll be writing the nickname as scripts, and then I'll pass a place to that. And the place now is also a string, so we'll be placing in double quotes, and the place is like US. So okay. And as I said you, like the contacts has been added, but still here we can find an error under the HTTP GET underline. So what is the error? The name HTTP GET does not exist in the current context. It's because we haven't added the semicolon after adding our private list. So I'll be adding a semicolon here. Now you can see that the error has been gone. Alright, with that in place, we can write the service call to receive this list. And to write the service method, what we'll be doing is like we'll be just removing the string here, which is returning a string in a get method, and we'll be just replacing with it contacts, and we'll be adding a semicolon. But you still find an error here. It's because the type of the get method is a string. So what we'll be doing is like we'll be just removing the string here, and we'll be passing contacts here, which is a type of list. So the error has been gone. So that's it guys, let's test it. Now I will be opening my developer PowerShell, and here make sure that you are in the proper directory. If you are not in the proper directory, then we'll be going to a proper directory by typing cd and our project name. In my case, my project name is like web API projects. So I'll be hitting on enter, and now it has gone into a proper path. Now to run our application, what we'll be using is like we'll be using .NET watch run, and I'll be hitting on enter. As you can see that the build has been started. Now you can see that the app has been built successfully, and we can see that now it's listening on HTTP localhost 5000. As soon as the app starts running, we'll be going to a Postman, and here we'll be making a GET request. Here we can see that we are using a localhost server like 5000, and we are calling a method called we are calling a controller called weather forecast. But instead of going with weather forecast, we'll be now going with the controller what we have created. So we'll be replacing the weather forecast with contacts, and we'll be hitting on send here. As you can see here, like here no data has been provided in the result. It's because what we have done a mistake is, like, we'll be going back to our Visual Studios to show what we have done that. I have done that wantedly. Here we can see that, like, here the root is API/controller, but in the Postman what the URL what we have provided is like HTTP localhost 5000/contacts. So it's not going to work in this way. So like what we'll be adding to this controller is like we'll be adding API/contacts, and we'll be hitting on a send button. Now you can see that the data has been returned here with the list what we have added in our contact list. So like we are having here like ID is 1, first name is developer, and last name is point, Iron Man, India, and the date created and the is deleted is false, as we had set the default value like that. As you can see that the contact list of ID number 2 is also returned here. Alright, before moving on, like we will be discussing about our get and put methods and post methods. So for that we will be going to our Visual Studios, and here I will be showing you. Here we can see that in front of every method, like we are having some HTTP get, HTTP post, and HTTP put. So what we'll be doing next is like in the very next minute we are going to discuss about all these methods. So let's talk about that. So now you know that this HTTP get method here tells the controller that the coming up method is a get method. But in this specific case, we could actually use this method without an attribute. You see, there is also a naming convention for the method, and if the method name starts with get, the web API assumes that the get is correct HTTP request method here. Now if the controller has only one get method, it works fine. But here in my case, like it has two get methods, like get without any parameters getting passed into it, and a get with a parameter of ID getting passed into it. And in this situation, the web service does not know which method should be called. That's where the root comes in here. This is the root which comes to help us to a web service and to make a call. In our case, we have got HTTP get method to receive all the web services which we get from the get method, and also same attribute to get a single contact. As you can see, the method HTTP get with a single contact has a parameter named as ID. Here in HTTP get method, it's written in a string form, and the parameter is passed here in the get method. This is called a route actually. So you could have added a separate route attribute here, or just combine it with HTTP request. The curly brackets here tells the controller that this is a parameter. So the string in these brackets and the actual name of the parameter has to match to make this work. Now of course, instead of returning a string value here, what we want to return is we want to return a contact with a given ID. So we will be just removing this and replacing it with, we will be taking a help of links, and we will be writing contacts, and then we will be writing dot first dot default, and then we'll take the help of lambda expressions. So like we will be saying as contacts is equal to greater than contact, where c dot id is equal to id which is passing here. But still here we can see that we have an error, and to get rid of this error, what we'll be doing is like we'll be changing the return type. Here the return type what we are returning is a list or a list of contact, but the return type is a string. So to change, like what we'll be doing is to get rid of this error is like we'll be replacing with contacts. Now as you can see here, the error has been gone. So now what we'll be doing is like firstly we'll be saying all our changes, and then we'll be going to our developer PowerShell. Now after opening the terminal window, what we'll be doing is like we'll be typing .NET watch run, and we'll be hitting enter. Now the build has been started. As you can see here, like it gives us the info saying that now you are listening on localhost 5000. So what we'll be doing is like we'll be going to Postman, and then we'll be checking whether it is coming or not with the normal get method. Just let me expand it. So as you can see here we'll be getting the two contacts list, which is developer and Angular. So like we have two get methods and this is the first get method. While coming to a second get method, what we'll be doing is like we'll be just passing the ID here. So we'll be just adding /1 and we'll be hitting on send button here. Again here we can just see that like here we just get a developer first name, like with who is having the ID 1. But if you want to, what you can get is like we will get the Angular here. What happens if you press 3? Like it will show us nothing here. It's because like we haven't added any error. So like what we'll be seeing in the next minute is like how to add errors when the ID number 3 is given. As we have already seen in the Postman, like if the ID is like 2 or 1, we get a status called 200 okay. But if we enter the ID 3, which is a null contact, then we get a status called 204 not found. We have some other famous statuses called namely like 404 not found, 403 forbidden, 500 internal server error. We don't like them, but as developers still we have to live with them, and even worse we have to handle them. But we can change the status code. Isn't that great? Let's return a 404 not found if the user entered a wrong ID. Like if we enter the 3 here, the status should be returning here is like 404. And so to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be going back to our Visual Studios, and in the get method here we will be writing the code to get that 404 error. Firstly, what we have to do is like we have to change the return method to iAction method. This return type iAction result is appropriate when multiple action result return types, meaning status code for instance are possible in a web service method. This iAction result method represents various HTTP status codes, so we will be using them. So with this type, we are able to send 404 not found, a bad request, and so on to our clients. Additionally, we can use the action result to wrap another result object like the contact in our case. So let's change the return type again and make it a action result. So what I'll be doing for that is like I'll be removing this action result and I'll be just making it as action result. And it will be containing of contact type, so we'll be passing contact here. Now what we want to do is like we want to return 404 not found if the contact is null or if it does not exist in the list. So what we'll be doing is like firstly we'll be removing this return type and we'll be deleting it. So we'll be writing the proper code before we return anything. Now we can return the contact with a message called OK. So we'll be typing OK and we'll be returning that contact. Now you can see that the code has been totally fixed, but it's not okay here. We still haven't added the message called 404 not found. And so to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be adding a if condition here. If contact is equal to null, then we'll be returning not found. So that's it guys. Now what we'll be doing is like we'll be testing this, and to do that what we'll be doing is like we'll be building our application. So do that we'll be opening our developer PowerShell. So here in my developer PowerShell I can see that my application is already in building mode. So I just need to save the changes, and here you can see that like it has started building again and it takes the changes where it has been done. Now the application is building. As you can see now the application is hosted on or listening on localhost 5000. So we'll be going back to our Postman, and what we'll be doing is like we'll be passing our localhost API controller with contacts with the ID number 3 and we'll be hitting on send. So here you can see that like here it shows error 404 not found, and here also the status code is 404 not found. But do you guys think it really enough for to doing this like 404 not found? But in my case I don't really think so. Like we need to pass a proper message saying that there is no contact present with the ID number 3. So for doing that what I'll be doing is like I will be adding a custom error message. It's very easy and very simple. So to do that what we'll be doing is like we'll be going back to our Visual Studios, and then we'll add a new property to not found, and we'll be adding a new property here, and then we'll simply pass a message saying that requested ID is not found. And we'll be closing the flower braces. Now you can see that there is no error. So what we'll be doing is now we'll be saving this and we'll be going back to our Postman. And again we'll be clicking on the send button here. As you can see now, like it returns a status called 404 not found and a custom validation message saying that request ID is not found. And we will be doing the same with the other get method. So to do that, what we'll be doing is we'll be going back to our Visual Studios again, and here we'll be adding an action result. So I'll be typing action result with enumerable contacts of contacts, and then I'll be adding a greater mark here. And here we'll be just returning the contacts. As by default, the status code for this method is like 200 OK. Now it's great, like the receiving contacts is working perfectly fine. So in the next minute, what we'll be looking at is like we'll be going with the post calls. When you go to your contacts controller and have a look at your HTTP post method, it's look a bit different. Firstly, the HTTP request method, of course. This time it is HTTP post. This time it is HTTP post instead of HTTP get. And it's make clear that we need to use post method in order to access this method. And then what we have got is like we have got an attribute called from body, and this one specifies a parameter should be bound using the request body. So for what we used to see in the HTTP get is like we were able to specify a contact what we want to see by providing its ID. When we want to create a new contact, there would be a lot of strings or integers we would have to enter in the URL. And it would become very more complicated if we don't want to add certain property and some data types. Entering data types in the URL is not easy, for example like a date for instance. Anyways, it's a lot easier to use a request body in the specific case. A primitive data type like a string could be used in the URL. That's why the from body attribute makes sense here. But what we want to do is like we want to send the object of a contact to this web service. And that's already a non-primitive data type, and the web API assumes that this one will be sent by request body anyways. So let's remove the attribute and change the parameter here. We will be removing the from body attribute here, and I will be removing the string value too here, and I will be passing a contact here, and I will be naming it as new contact. Additionally, instead of returning nothing, I would like to return the complete list of contacts so that we could see the list of contacts right away. So to do that, what I'll be doing is like I'll be making it a action result here of enumerables of contacts. For that, we could use the action result type and read the list of contacts. The next step is very easy. What we'll be doing is like we'll be simply just adding the contacts. What we'll be doing is like we'll be simply adding the new contact list to the contacts. So for doing that, what we'll be doing is like contacts that add of new contact, and then we'll be ending it by a semicolon, and then I will be returning contact. So here we can see that like there is no error, and I will be saving this. Now let's go to a Postman back, and we'll be testing this post method. And so to do that, what we'll be doing, like we'll be going back to a Postman service here, and we'll be firstly changing the method here. So instead of using the get method, we'll be using post now here. And what we'll be doing is like keeping everything same here. But to send a list of new contacts, we need a body here. To add a new body here, what we'll be doing is like we'll be going to a body tab here, and we'll be clicking on that. And like we'll be going to the raw here, and we'll be selecting the raw here, and the body type we will be selecting JSON. So here we'll be adding the body. So firstly, like we'll be adding the first name. First name is Tony, and then we'll be adding the last name. Last name is Tak. Then we'll be adding the nickname. And the nickname is like Iron Man. Then we will be adding a place, and place is New York. So what we have forgotten is like we have forgotten to add our ID. So like I will be adding the ID here, and I will be passing it as an integer because the data type what we have given is an integer. So the ID will be 3 and I will be ending it with a comma. And now we will be clicking on the send button. So what we can see, the result is like we will get the developer as ID 1 and developer 2 as Angular. While coming to the ID number 3, it is a Tony Stark. Perfect, this worked just fine. Keep in mind though that this Tony Stark will not be saved permanently yet. For saving this permanently, what we need to do is like we need to use a SQL server or like entity framework to store this in our database. So for that I will be showing you an example. So like I will be changing my ID here to 4 and I will be changing Tony to Bruce, and I'll be changing some banner here, and I'll be keeping the place and the nickname same here, like I can't change it again and again. So guys, don't mind anything. So what I'll be doing is like I'll be clicking on send button again. So what we can see is like ID number 1 is developer, ID number 2 is Angular. While coming to ID number 3, it's no more there, but we have added a new ID called number 4, which has just been recently added by us, called Bruce Banner. So this is what I am trying to say is like although it's getting added, but it is never saved in the database. And to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be adding entity framework or like Dapper or SQLite to save it in our database by using the connection string. But this course does not cover that. If you want to look at how to save this data into a database, please go and check out my course on entity framework. Okay, after completion of this, like what we have next is like we will be discussing about put method in the next minute. So to make use of put method, what we'll be doing is like we'll be going back to our Visual Studios, and here we can see that we have a put method here. The put method is used to update the contact which is present in the list. Here in this put method, here you can see something familiar which we have seen earlier in our earlier methods. Here we can see an attribute of ID which is passed as a string, and here we can see the from body attribute which is having a string values. And here the ID is again used for routing. Here the ID parameter is used to route the put method. While coming to the from body, it is used to replace the body or replace the contacts which we want to update using the ID. Firstly, we will be changing the return type here so that we could see the complete contact list there. So that I will be using action result of enumerables of contacts. Here you can see an error which is having a red line. We will discuss this later why it is showing an error to you. So for now we will be removing this from body, and again we will be replacing with contacts, and in here I will be choosing update contacts. Of course, with that signature, the new web API method knows that the ID is used in the root and the data you want to send to a service is in the request body. Regarding the body of the method, firstly, what we'll be doing is like we'll check if a contact with a given ID present or not. So we'll check it existence for now. So to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be calling the contact here, and then we'll be calling as a contacts, and then we'll be making it as contacts dot first dot default, and then we'll be checking whether the ID is present or not. So we'll be using the lambda expression c equal to greater than contacts dot ID equal to the ID which is passing in the parameter. So what we need to do is like we should be giving a double equal to here, which I missed in previously. So we will be ending this with a semicolon, but we can still see an error here. It does not go like that. I'll show you why it is there, but firstly we'll be matching if there is a contact present or not. So what we'll do is like we'll be using the if condition. If contact is null is equal to null, then what we'll be returning is a not found. we'll be returning not found here. Now it's up to you what you want to do in this method. So like if you want to update or override only few parameters, then you can do that. So you can do that by doing like contacts.nickname is equal to updated contacts.nickname, and I want to change the flag which is deleted. So I'll be doing that contact dot is deleted is equals to update contacts dot is deleted. And finally what we'll be doing is like we will be returning the complete contact list. So now to test whether this put method is working or not, like we will be going back to a Postman and checking this thing. So let's go to a Postman, and here we'll be passing our ID here. Like I want to change it on ID number 2. So like first of all we'll be getting this method changed to put, and then what we'll be doing is like we'll be just passing the nickname here. So I'll be reviewing the other extra parameters which are being passed here. So like here I want to change the nickname of angler to something called Hulk. And firstly let's check whether what is present in our contacts list. So what I'll be doing is like I'll be sending a contacts list here. So I'll be reviewing the 2 here and we'll be getting the contacts list. So here we can see that in ID number 1 we have a developer, and ID number 2 we have angler. So like to edit the ID number 2, what I'm going to do is like I'll be changing this get method to a post put method, and then I'll be adding a ID here saying as 2, and then I'll be passing this parameter nickname Hulk, and then I'll be hitting on send. So the results have been extracted. Then we can see here like the nickname has been updated, and here we can change the if is deleted also, like so that I'll be passing here one more thing like is deleted, and I'll be making it as true. So I'll be adding the double quotes here, and then what we'll be doing is like we'll be doing it for 1, and then what we're going to do is like we'll be changing the nickname to test, and then we'll hit on the send button. Now you can see that is deleted has been changed to true, but anyhow any of this data is not going to save in our database. So although if we again click on the get method here, then we'll change the contacts, remove the ID there, and we'll be hitting on send, then we'll get the original data here. So there is no change happening and no change is getting saved. To make these changes save, we will be using Entity Framework or Dapper to save into a SQL Server. To have a course on Entity Framework, please follow my videos on my YouTube channel Developers Point. Anyways, so in this web API course, like we almost came to an end, so let's complete the CRUD operations with the operation called delete. And we'll be seeing the delete method in the Visual Studios. So let's go back to the Visual Studios, and here we can see that we have a delete method here. Here the delete method is having an attribute called id, which has been seen in the previous get and put methods. So here this delete method is passing an id, so which the id is passed to its root where it can be get deleted. So deleting an entry is very pretty straightforward. Anyhow, we all are familiar with the id attribute which is present here. But the only difference is like the method. Previously we have used put, get and post methods, but now we will be dealing with the HTTP delete method. Again what we will be doing is like we will be changing the return type to action result so that we can return a complete contact list. Action result of I enumerables of contacts. Then what we'll be doing is like we'll be adding some code logic here. As I told you previously, like here we had an error in the put method also, but it has been removed now, but I was forgotten to explain you why it was there. So here I'm going to explain you that. Like here we are having a return type of action result, but currently we are not returning anything, so it gives an error. When we return something here, then the error goes automatically away. So for example, let's show it to you here. So for example, let me show it to you here. If we remove the return contacts here, then it throws an error in the put method. But by just keeping it back, it just we just get rid of this error. So it is the same thing happening here. So it's not a big deal, so don't worry about that, guys. What we are going to do in this method is like we'll be writing some logic, and some logic is nothing but we'll be adding the new contacts here, and we'll be calling as a contact, and then we will be doing is like contacts dot first or default. Then we'll be using the lambda expressions here. C is equals to greater than c dot id equal to id. Then we'll be ending this with a semicolon. And now what we'll be doing is like if we found the contacts is null, then we'll be returning bad request or not found. So what we'll be finally doing is like we'll be removing the contacts from the contact list. So after checking whether the contact is null or not, we'll be returning not found. If it is null, then we'll be returning not found, else we'll be removing the contact. And so to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be writing contacts dot remove contact, and we'll be ending with a semicolon, and then we'll be returning that contact here. And we'll be saving this. Now let's go to a Postman and check whether this delete method is working or not. And so to do that, what we'll be doing is like we'll be going back to our Postman, and here we'll be changing the get method to delete method. So here in the delete method, I'll be not be passing any of the bodies, so I'll be removing all these things. And then what I'll be doing is like I have anyhow selected the delete method here, then I'll be giving my or passing my id which I want to delete. So I want to delete the angler which is little odd, like angler 11 scripting. So I just want to remove that, so I'll be giving /2, and then I'll be hitting on send button. Now you can see that like only one value is present here, which is id number 1 develop, and the id number 2 angler has been deleted permanently. So what we'll be doing again is like I want to delete the developer 2. So what I'll be doing is like I'll be changing the id to 1, and again I'll be hitting on send button. So we can see that the id number 2 is present here. Like now you guys may ask what's happening here. Like we have deleted the id number 2, but again it came back. So as I said you before, like we may have deleted the changes, but those are not permanent because those are not getting saved. To save that, we need entity framework or dapper to be used to save the data into our databases permanently. So if you want to check out the course on entity framework, then you can go to my channel's description or my playlist list. So far now it's great to work with this, and we have completed all the CRUD operations like post, put, delete and get methods. Now let's sum up what you have learned in this crash course. Firstly, congratulations to all of you for completing the Web API crash course in my channel. Now here I will be summing up like what we have learned with this crash course. We have successfully built a Web API application with .NET 5.4.3, and then we have learned a MVC pattern using model view controller, and then we have learned about the status codes by using the HTTP request methods like get, post and delete and put methods. We also learned to create our first model in our Web API project. Then we created our first controller. Then in that controller we have written the logic code for get method. Then we have written the logic for post method. Then we went through with put method, and then we have finally dealt with delete method. So now you know how to read objects with get method and create new objects with post method and update them with the put method and delete them with the delete method. Of course, now if you want to make your changes permanent in your database, then please follow my entity framework crash course which is in my channel. Thank you for watching my video. Please like, share, comment and subscribe to my channel Developers Point. Bye bye.